Hello, I'm Chris Segura, the contemporary Cajun writer. And that's the subject of the film you're about to see. It was made in 1984, and when it's completed, just hang around through the credits, and I'll give you an update on what's happened since. Thanks. Enjoy.
Observe-moi bien mignon, de besoin mais pour toi-même. Pour moi mais je mérite pas, tout ça c'est après faire. T'as presque été étonné, jolie et jolie fille. Ouh.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Chris Segura. My name is Chris Segura. And this is the world's first land pirogue. I had it made for me out of one-piece fiberglass working pirogue. Much like the original working pirogues were one-piece cypress. What I did was, I had our local blacksmith shop make me some axles and put some wheels. Then I put swivel wheels on each end to keep the ends from dragging and turning operation. It's propelled and guided principally by this push pole. It's a working push pole. On one end, the regular hinged metal duck foot for use in the marsh, the swamps, and the bayous. And on the other end, I put a bathroom plunger for two reasons. First, because it works on the pavement, and second, because I don't want to take myself too seriously. This, I usually tell people I made this for use in hard water or when the Chapelai Basin silts up, but the truth is I use it to promote my books, Bayou Fantasia and Marshland Brace. It's guided like a regular pirogue. There's 3 points like a bicyclist. Bicyclist has his derriere, his feet, and his hands. And in this pirogue, you have your hands, your feet, and the point of the pole. The way it's changed, the direction is changed by subtle manipulations of the feet in a pushing motion. So there you have it. Chris Segura, author of Marshland Brace and Bayou, and the world's first land pirogue, or as we say, pirogue de terre. Adieu.
Where I live. I write about southern Louisiana, where I live, where my ancestors pioneered, and where they lived and struggled and died.
All this started for me with my first master, my first storytelling master. He was my grandfather. We started almost 35 years ago. And I did my apprenticeship in much the same way that boys were taught a trade in the Middle Ages or during the Renaissance. What we did was tell stories every night. I sat by the fire when the rest of the house was watching television or whatever, and my grandfather and I would tell stories. First, he told me the stories of his boyhood, his youth, and young manhood. And these were tales because he was almost fanatically patriotic about the main parish and about Abbeville. These tales were always sprinkled with a kind of the lore of the area. stories of his boyhood, how he came from Oklahoma in a covered wagon in 1886 when he was 4 years old, how about the Indians and about the early people here in the early days of Louisiana oil, and Huey Long was his friend, and about poor people trying to survive in a terribly difficult world, and doing so nobly and with humor. I'd been writing novels for 2 years before I really learned what a transition actually was. And I realized that where I learned it was back there in front of that fireplace all those years ago in that little house outside Abbeville. Way down in the bio country, Louisiana. That's where I met my Cajun baby. There's one little man. Her teeth are like curly hair, like a hole. My Cajun baby for the world.
Chris Segura is a writer of fiction from Abbeville. His most recent book that is out is called Martial Embrace. We'll put it up here for everyone to see. It's a book of 2 stories published by the LSU Press. James Dickey calls the book remarkable. The stories in it startling, inevitable, unforgettable. A lot of people look at the book and say, well, there's Chris Segura. Look, he did it, overnight. An overnight success. Yeah, right. Yeah. How does a writer get to be an overnight success? It takes, what, 20 years?
Hemingway said you have to watch the sun come up every day for 20 years. In my case, I wrote my first short story when I was 9, but there wasn't much of a short story. And my first novel in high school. And I just all my life thought of myself as a storyteller, and suddenly this little book of all those that I wrote is published, and people find it to be beautiful. It's really sort of a...
Well, it is beautiful. And why don't you read a little bit from it for us, and then tell us something about what it was you were trying to do, and how you look at the characters and the places where these stories are set.
Oh, yeah. And remind me that I'm supposed to do that after I read this passage. Okay. I may forget. Whenever I'm asked to read, this is the passage that I always read. For one reason, the book opens to that page. But page 116, at the beginning of the second section of the longer story. The bateau was loaded and moored broadside to the heavy oak beams of the dock, secured close, yet rocking slightly in the gentle tidal drift. He held the bow line and pulled it even tighter as the old people, first his grandmother and then his grandfather, were helped into the boat. Yeah. Hands reaching up to them and hands gently helping them downward. Smiles of embarrassment in the cold pre-dawn darkness, and smiles of eagerness, his own broad smile of eagerness. The old people went forward into the cabin. The diesels rumbled instantly to deep-throated growling power, and he tossed the line onto the deck of the hull at his uncle's nodded signal, pushed the nose slanting into the silky blackness of the canal, then ran to unravel the hitches on the huge anvil-shaped tie-down at the stern. Holding the loose end of the stern line not to have it foul the propellers, he jumped lightly to the gunwale, stepped to the stern deck, and saw his uncle's face in the cabin glow, watching to be certain he was securely aboard. Then Antoine turned, pushed the ball-top throttle levers forward, and they were moving forward, moving into the lush marsh darkness, cleaving the dark waters in the thick, cold marsh night. He climbed around the cabin to the bow, inching his shoes into the narrow space and holding to the rail on the cabin top. He was cold, and he pulled the jacket about him against the biting wind, but he also felt wonderful to be alone in the pull of the wind rushing past his body and the exuberance of going into the marsh for the trapping season, leaving school, leaving everything behind. He leaned against the center support of the windshield, sitting with his legs stretched before him on the foredeck. The cabin glow was behind him. Above him were the millions of stars in the clear winter sky. The boat split the outline of the canal, marsh darker at the borders, and scrub trees bushy rounded and reflected in the water. He could not hear above the diesel sound, of course, the voices of the marsh, nor the splash of the animals sliding, running to the water in fear or in play, but he knew that they were there. Occasionally, his uncle shined the high overhead light from bank to bank, a powerful beam of almost purifying white light that showed every detail starkly. In this way, Antoine ascertained the distance of each bank, but Leland used these opportunities to search for animals. And he saw many of them, or at least what he thought were animals at times. Clearly he saw their eyes reflecting, or the gray-brown of their fur. Or sometimes he saw them standing in clear view on the levee, looking curiously and directly into the light. They took the inland route to the Cheniere. The boat weaved through the bayous and canals almost magically, almost as if by feel in the shades of darkness. They passed many trappers' cabins, shacks of scrap lumber and tar paper with the empty drying racks like tall hitching posts surrounding them on the levees. But after they had entered the family's marsh, there were no more cabins. The Viators leased no trapping grounds or hunting rights outside the family. Anyone else on their ground was a trespasser. A local trapper could follow wounded game onto the land if he obeyed the marsh proprieties of cleanliness and respect for its owners. But strangers were strictly purged. So many had been sent on over the decades by Viators with shotguns close by, if not in their hands, their faces stern enough to make their point without words, that the area around Cheniere-Otigue was the most destitute of human company in the parish, and all shooting, even by the family itself, was forbidden by tradition on the island. Foxes, rare to the point of non-existence in the rest of the parish, calmly trotted beside strollers on the island like household dogs. Deer and rabbit often came onto the porch of the house during the night, and the opening and slamming shut of doors in the morning did little more than ripple their coats with nervousness. Even the alligators in the late spring, after their long sleep and the first gorging to fill their skins, crossed the island slowly with impunity to bathe in the Gulf's salt water and rid themselves of freshwater leeches. The squirrels in the huge old hurricane-twisted oaks thrived and chattered and were the island's clowns. 1 mile long and 200 yards wide, the island was one family's truce with nature, a sanctuary for men and beasts together. When the boat thumped against the hard ground of the Cheniere, the boy jumped quickly to the land and made the proper raps of the bow line to the oak beam sunk into the rich ground. Then he secured the stern line tossed by his father. The diesel was quieted. Except for the voices within the cabin of the bateau, the marsh sounds came to him purely with a message of closeness. The boy wished to run. He wanted to run straight across the island and see the vastness of the Gulf, hear close hand the waves upon the silty beaches. He wanted to watch the starlight upon the pitted and sun-bleached shells of the cemetery and run the line of oaks to where the ridge finally gave to the marsh and the sea and the hunting and the trapping began. Or to climb inside the still-standing hollow giant oak up to the narrow opening at the branching of the limbs, finding the secret crevices of his boyhood. But he stayed and calmed his excitement and helped with the unloading. The whole Cheniere had once been cultivated in fruit trees and vegetable gardens and fields for farming, and among the fruitful plants roamed many beasts, peacefully. Even large predators of Africa and Asia imported at tremendous cost through New Orleans in the days of sailing vessels. Nothing then went to waste. Everything was stored and canned and processed and preserved. Even now, fruit trees blossomed and bore alone in the most primevally primitive parts of the islands. The oranges or lemons or pears or peaches sometimes breaking the branches with their weight only to lie and rot and return to the soil. Leland had been born on the island. He was the last of the Viators to be born there. Now the hospital was necessary. The first sounds he had heard were the waves on the beach and the wind in the camp and the wind in the trees and the hollow sounds of the family in the camp. His first smells that of blood and fluid and the kerosene lamp. First light the unpainted cypress tinted yellow by the lamplight and the sunlight through the window and the limbs of trees. At the last laden trip to the house from the boat dock, the sun was rising. In winter, the sun rose and set exactly on the east-west land water line. It rose red, the bare oak branches filigreed against it, and the child quality rose in him too strongly then, and he whooped and ran the line of trees that were like on soldiers reviewed to the sun, yelling and hearing his own voice echo like ghosts, radiating outward from him the rabbits and squirrels and foxes and deer and muskrat, even otter and mink and nutria scampered, scratching and rattling the brush like accompanying giggles. And the branches of the oaks unlayered as he ran, like
glacy veils removed one by one from some bright, glowing jewel, at once huge and warm, until he stood at the juncture of beach and marsh and land, and man in life and death. The sun had risen, born of both the grass and the sea, and hovered above him, lighting the waving greens and browns of the marsh, and the heaving grays and greens and blues of the sea, and the panting, smiling boy with the rose of morning.
That's fantastic. That's
Thank
fantastic.
you. Thank you.
The language is absolutely gorgeous, and the quality, I give you to borrow the phrase that when you're speaking of the boat going, it's magical.
Well,
magical.
Thank you.
Now,
my heart soars like a hawk.
You know, a lot of people go out there and look at that marsh, and they're not likely to see it quite that way. What is there that makes you see it that way, and why is it you want to deal with it like that, and present it to us that way?
Well, the simple answer is that these are my people, and this is what I know. Probably a more personal answer would be that I spent many of the most pleasurable hours of my life in the marsh when I was an adolescent, particularly. And my brother and I hunted, and we were obsessed with it. You know, it was when you say some people go out in the marsh and they don't see that, it's amazing to me, because that's the way I see it.
Right.
The marsh is so beautiful in so many different ways, and to the untrained eye, I understand the changes of the marsh aren't evident. You know, like a summer marsh is much different than a winter marsh, and both are beautiful. Paradoxically, this is something, the marsh, there's all kind of themes and analogies to be drawn for it, but paradoxically, when the marsh is the most beautiful is when it's the most deadly, and that's in the summer.
Right.
Now that, that concept in itself is enough for dramatic possibility.
I thought I got something in there of almost a kind of ambivalence, that it's not just beauty, it's not just a love affair with it. There's also a sense, and you use the word starkly and images of starkness several times. That's in a strange way part of its beauty, but it's also the reminder that this is a setting of well, as you put it down and at the end of it, this is a setting of not just of a place where a boy romps happily through nature, but where he really meets life and death.
And death, right.
It's all there.
Yeah, with the trappers especially, death is always present. Death is a method of life, and all the evidence around you in the marsh is that violence is a way of life in a natural and gentle sort of way. Yeah. Some creatures, animal or plants, die so that other creatures, animals and plants, survive. It's almost a benign horror, really.
But when man puts himself in that context and he starts to observe it, he ends up with some marvelous stories to tell.
And he has to live by those rules.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Okay. Could you very quickly then? I know you've been working on a series of stories. You got a series of ghost stories. What are they to be titled?
Bayou Fantasia.
Bayou Fantasia.
With PH for the Fantasia.
Okay.
So that I don't copy Walt Disney too closely.
Okay.
But there's occult stories. We loosely call them ghost stories. They fit several genres, actually.
Okay.
But they're a lot of fun. They're set here, and they draw upon this mystic quality, if not, and in some cases, the actual mystical, occult stories, that real stories that come out of here. It's all fictionalized. They're all.
Yeah.
Some of them I didn't know where they came from when I sat down at the typewriter. Others, of course, remembered stories from my childhood, and I used those.
Okay. Has a timetable been set up for that yet? Do you know when they're coming out?
They are in May for the World's Fair. They're going to be sold at the World's Fair. They're illustrated by George Rodriguez, I have to mention.
Fantastic.
Because he's, I think his art is particularly suited for this. Right. And we're all real excited about it.
This has been delightful. Chris Segura from Abbeville, a writer, and as we like to say at the Deep South Writers Conference, Chris, you demonstrate, one, that you have an extraordinary talent, and two, that there are people here who are writing, who have talent, and if you persist, it works.
Here we go. Okay, this is a take, everybody, so get take. Are you ready? Yeah.
tabler, madame, que n'a como. Petit et trop mignon, pour faire ta crémière. Comment tu crois, mais moi, peux faire, mais moi, tu sais. Mais toi, ma jolie cœur, garde donc et quoi tomber. Tu m'as laissé ton nez, mais ton pour ton aller. Allons à la Bayenne, mais pour changer ton nom. On va t'appeler madame Canacomo. Petit et trop mignon, pour faire ta créminière. Observe-moi bien mignon, ne pas voir mais pour toi-même. Pour moi, mais je mérite pas, tout ça c'est ta préfère. Ta preuve qui t'est ton air, jolie et jolie fille.
Well, as you can see, a lot has changed in almost 30 years. For one thing, I'm just about 100 pounds lighter than I was then. For another thing, I no longer work on these old friends. Even the ribbons are hard to find. What I work on is this now. Another one you might have noticed when I was sitting out under the tree, there was a dictionary sitting by me. I had 3 big dictionaries, and I carried them with me on 5 continents, working as a journalist and doing freelance work. Now all of those are in these little things, the e-books. Marshland Brace, that was highlighted in the interview with Carl Wooten, is now Marshland Trinity, and it's available through my website, Win Lose Inc., and on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble. It's got another story added to it that makes up the whole trilogy. But the most important innovation that has happened is the development of these little e-books. Now, indie writers, that's what they call us now. We don't have to go through that old boys network, you know, with agents and publishers and editors. I know a lot was lost during that, but a lot was gained too. So I'm publishing now through Smashwords.com. You can find these books there, and of course I've got this book with Amazon and with Barnes & Noble. The one thing that has not changed, the most important thing that has not changed, is that I am still writing, and I'm still living and writing in Abbeville, Louisiana, where I was born, and I'm still writing about the culture, my culture, and all of its ramifications. That is something that I'm not unusual in that. There are writers, thousands, millions of writers over the course of time that have always been looking for an avenue, and now we have one. So I would encourage you to do everything you can to help these writers, and including myself. And I hope you enjoyed this little presentation, and think of us from time to time.